Good evening, everyone. Let's deal with imaging techniques in neuroophthalmology today. So, imaging in neuroophthalmology is usually used to supplement clinical evaluation, but it can never substitute it. For example, suppose a patient presents to you with clinical features which are suggestive of optic neuritis. Say the patient has retroorbital pain, diminution of vision, restriction in extraocular movements, and painful extraocular movements. So, such clinical findings are suggestive of optic neuritis. Such a patient, when undergoes MRI brain, shows plaques in the brain. Such a change, which are the plaques that are seen, is highly suggestive of demyelination which is present in the brain. However, if such clinical features are absent but the plaque is still seen, this means that the plaque is not necessarily demyelination. So that is the significance of clinical examination before performing and ordering radiological investigations. And the first imaging technique, which is the most common imaging technique that we use in neuroophthalmology, is computed tomography. The basic principle is, instead of one single X-ray beam, there are multiple X-ray beams that are utilized, and depending on the tissue density, how dense or how rare is the tissue, the beams pass through it. If the tissue is more dense, that means the beams are not going to pass through it as easily, and consequently the image is going to get altered accordingly. Thinner the slice, better is the resolution. What do I mean by slice? It means the distance between the two rays that I'm sending. So if I have to have better resolution, I need to thin out the slices of the beams that I'm making. But that also means that I'm exposing the patient to more ionizing radiation, because consequently I'll be using more X-rays. In a computerized tomography, or a CT scan is very commonly called, coronal and axial sections are possible. So what do I mean by coronal? Coronal basically means a transverse section, which means an axis that is passing between the two shoulders, and axial section is basically a cut section. The units that measure the tissue density are called Hounsfield units, based on the scientist who discovered, the radiologist who discovered. Bone has the maximum Hounsfield unit of 1 plus 1000, which is the maximum, which means bone is the most hyper dense tissue that is present on CT scan, whereas air is the least, which is minus 1000. In simple words, bone will appear the whitest because it will occlude the maximum number of X-rays, and air will appear the blackest because that will allow all the rays to pass through it. Using contrast, which is IV contrast, increases the sensitivity as well as the specificity. But if the patient is allergic to iodine, because these contrast media are based on iodine, or if the patient has renal failure, because these contrast media, if stay in the body for too long, are going to cause toxic reactions, because after all it is a foreign body. But if the patient has renal failure, you will not give such a patient a contrast, because the contrast is primarily excreted through the urinary system. It is also not to be used in acute hemorrhage, bony injuries, or foreign body evaluation, simply because both a hemorrhage and a contrast have the same density on a CT scan. So both are going to be appearing similar, and a masking effect starts coming in. So where all in ophthalmology can you use CT scan? You can use it in traumas to evaluate bony fractures, to see where blood collections have occurred in and around the orbit, herniation of extraocular muscles or extraocular fat, and emphysema. So emphysema is the only finding amongst all traumatic findings which is going to appear black. Every other finding, say a fracture, a blood, or a herniation, is going to appear white, because emphysema means air collection. Secondly, it can be used to evaluate the extraocular muscles itself. In case of thyroid eye disease, the muscle belly starts swelling with a sparing of the tendon. So only the belly of the muscle swells and the tendon remains of normal thickness. So the CT scan helps in that evaluation. Tumors, intraocular and extraocular tumors, the extent of the tumor, whether intraocular calcification occurs, which is very common in meningioma and retinoblastoma. So tumors are already white in appearance. In that, if you have micro pockets of even whiter densities, which is highly suggestive of calcification, and when you see calcification, a tumor etiology should start coming to your mind. And if the tumor has spread in the surrounding areas, which is involving the bones of the orbit, it can be used to study inflammation in infective conditions such as orbital cellulitis, either the intraorbital extension itself or the subperiosteal abscess, which means now it has spread to the bone of the orbit, or the bones forming the orbital wall. It can be used to look at hemorrhages, either cerebral or subarachnoid, which can explain certain visual symptoms. And finally, intraocular foreign body evaluation, especially metallic, because metallic foreign bodies means you cannot use an MRI. So CT scan becomes the investigation of choice for intraocular foreign bodies, because unless proven otherwise, any foreign body is to be assumed to be metallic, because you cannot risk the patient to have an MRI before a CT scan in case of an intraocular foreign body. Alright, so I just wanted to look at this image. Look at the red arrow first. and compare it with the other side. So this is an axial section where you are looking at the patient from the front end. Imagine the patient is looking at you. So the red arrow is pointing to the left eye. So compare the inferior margin of the orbit to the opposite side. The left eye, inferior margin of the orbit is broken. So this is an orbital fracture, more specifically the floor of the fracture. So this is a blowout fracture of the orbit. Look at the green arrow. A black density seen inside the orbit is very, very suggestive of orbital emphysema. So the management for this is conservative. You do not surgically operate this patient, just local therapy, either systemic antibiotics, systemic anti-inflammatory, and local cold compresses to reduce the inflammation. The edema resolves on its own. The emphysema also resolves on its own. So this is a case of blowout fracture of the orbit. Now I want you to look at this image. Look at the red arrow. The red arrow is pointing to the extraocular muscle. Now this is a axial section again, and this arrow is pointing to the left medial rectus muscle, and the muscle belly is enlarged. The muscle belly is swollen with a relative sparing of the tendons, very classical of thyroid eye disease. So a suggestive history also needs to be taken. A history of smoking, which is very commonly associated, a history of oral contraceptive pills, so on and so forth. So relevant history of proptosis, and examination finding of proptosis, things like that. So that's how you correlate clinical with radiological. Okay, so what are the advantages of CT scan? It is widely available. Almost every hospital has a CT scan machine. It is inexpensive, which means it is cheaper as compared to some of the more advanced radiological investigations such as MRI or PET scan. It is easy, relatively easy to learn, and it is quick. One CT scan of the brain takes roughly 10 to 15 minutes, and it gets done very quickly. The most important disadvantage is an exposure to ionization radiation. So one CT scan is roughly equal to 140 chest X-rays at the same time, which is approximately 2.8 millisieverts. So that is the unit, millisievert. Sagittal sections are not possible. So what do I mean by sagittal section? An axis that is passing from the back of your head to the front. So say for example, a vertical section, it is not possible because of the machine design, and IV contrast reactions are very common since it is a very irritating compound, and bony artifacts are very often seen. These artifacts can also be because of the ornaments that the patient may be wearing, either the earrings, the nose ring. Those kind of things need to be removed before performing a CT scan. But very often it is not possible to do so because it is an emergency case. A head trauma patient, you can't really worry about removing the ornaments before getting the scan first. Okay, so the second imaging modality is magnetic resonance imaging, in short MRI. The principle is you rearrange the positively charged hydrogen nuclei that are present in every cell of the body or the region that you are examining. So there are the nuclei, the hydrogen nuclei at a normal position. You provide a brief magnetic pulse. An electromagnetic impulse is given to these nuclei. So naturally these nuclei are going to absorb this energy, this magnetic pulse that has been given to them, and naturally their energy state will elevate. Once you stop the magnetic pulse, these cells have to come back to their resting state. So this energy has to be released by the nuclei. Once this energy is released, it is picked up by the magnetic resonance imaging machine as an echo. And depending on how dense the tissue is, the echoes will vary, and consequently an image can be constructed. Two basic methods how you can perform an MRI scan. It depends on which scan the tissue is best seen. So either it can be a T1 weighted image or a T2 weighted image. The details are not important from neuro-ophthalmology perspective. However, to know the basics, T1 is best seen for normal anatomy and T2 is best for pathological tissue. Under T1 scanning, water is always seen as black, so that is how you identify. You first look at the fluid-filled structures of the body, say the CSF, the aqueous humor, the vitreous humor, and if it appears black, then it is a T1 weighted image, and if it is white, it is a T2 weighted image. And T2 is best for pathological tissue because edematous tissue is a swollen tissue. It has a lot of fluid in it because of the inflammation. And since water appears white, edematous tissue can very easily be picked up on T2 weighted imaging. That is why it is best for pathological tissue. Blood vessels themselves are seen as black on T2 imaging. However, if they are occluded, they will start appearing to be white. So I want you to look at these two images. The first image is a T1 weighted image. And how do I do that? Look at the orbit, the two orbits. The eyeball is primarily appearing black. It is either the aqueous or the vitreous depending on which section this is. This is an axial section again. This is a coronal section. So depending on where the cut has been taken, this could either be aqueous or vitreous, but doesn't matter, both appear black. So this is a T1 weighted image. The left side image is a T1 weighted image. Compare that to the right side. This is again an axial section. So the axial section, the eyeballs are appearing primarily white. Now this white is again the fluid. So this becomes a T2 weighted image. So that's how you identify whether it is a T1 or a T2 weighted image. Certain techniques you can use to further enhance the images. The first is again contrast, the same way that you use in an IV contrast in a CT scan. So the contrast, the name of the contrast is gadolinium, and it is best for tumor or inflammatory evaluation. The contrast itself remains intravascular unless the blood-brain barrier is broken. So that again becomes a clinical sign. If you see contrast where it should not be, where it is outside the blood-brain barrier, that is a sign that the blood-brain barrier is compromised and there is a leakage. Usually it is done only on T1 weighted imaging, and MRI protocol is always before and after the contrast. For example, say I do not give the contrast, first I do the MRI scan, then I give the contrast. An MRI scan later will show all the areas where the contrast has been taken up, and suppose the left optic nerve is lighting up in a fusiform fashion, then I can start imagining whether this could either be a tumor or an inflammation. The second technique I can use is fat suppression, and fat suppression is very useful in ophthalmology because orbit has a lot of fat which is appearing white and brightly seen on T1. So what are the structures that I can look at after fat suppression? If I suppress the orbital fat impulses, then the rest of the structures start becoming prominent. Structures such as the optic nerve, the extraocular muscles, any tumors that might be present, inflammations or vascular malformations, which otherwise would have been occluded by this orbital fat. So there are two modes, just the names that you have to understand and remember. There is something called T1 fat saturation, which is used to study the optic nerve sheath, which is the covering around the optic nerve, and something called short T1 inversion recovery. So that's called STIR, S-T-I-R, which is used to study the optic nerve itself. Just knowing the name is sufficient from a neuro-ophthalmology perspective. The third way that you can perform MRI is something called FLAIR. So FLAIR stands for Fluid Attenuated Inversion Recovery. In simple words, it is just a T2 scan with removal of all the fluid impulses. So which fluid impulse that I'm most importantly trying to remove? It is the ventricles, the lateral ventricles, the first and the second ventricles that are present. So once I remove that, the structures which are surrounding the lateral ventricles start becoming more prominent. Because if the fluid is appearing white on T2, then any surrounding tissue that is white is going to get overpowered or overshadowed by the lateral ventricle white. So I remove the white impulses from the lateral ventricle, the fluid impulses. So that makes the periventricular plaques much clearer. So periventricular plaques are seen in multiple sclerosis, and that is why FLAIR is the most commonly done investigation as an MRI in multiple sclerosis. The next method of MRI is something called diffusion weighted imaging. Not very important from ophthalmological perspective, but just for the sake of completion, we'll just discuss it. It is used to catch early ischemic strokes. Otherwise, it's very difficult to catch ischemic strokes on either a CT scan or an MRI scan. Hemorrhagic strokes very quickly caught on CT scan, but ischemic strokes are very difficult. So diffusion weighted imaging helps in finding out an early ischemic stroke, and it helps to decide whether therapy is going to be useful for such a patient or not. The last method is either Fiesta or CIS. Just to know, it is used for cranial nerve palsies. It is still under investigation, not widely utilized, but just a name I thought you should remember. Okay, so where all in ophthalmology can I use MRI? I can use it to study the optic nerve, more specifically in neuritis, in glioma, or an intracranial extension of the tumor itself. Optic nerve sheath tumors such as meningioma can be very quickly seen on an MRI scan. Pituitary tumors are seen on a T1 weighted imaging system, and cavernous sinus thrombosis, say for example I'm assuming the cavernous sinus has got thrombosed, then an MRI starts getting good utility value. And again, intracranial visual pathways, most importantly demyelination of the visual pathways, can be studied on an MRI. So in this image, this is a coronal section, and I'm looking at the patient head on, front end. The red arrow is pointing to the left orbital area, and compare the central white circle to the white circle in the right side. So that white circle is the optic nerve, and the right one is normal, whereas the left one is enlarged, it is dilated, and it is on a contrast media. After injecting a gadolinium contrast, the white area has lit up in the left eye. So this is very classical of optic nerve meningioma. It is a tumor of the optic nerve sheath and not of the optic nerve itself. The extraocular muscles are surrounding it in small patchy, those cylindrical white structures that you can see. Those are appearing to be pretty much normal in this image. Okay, now look at this image. This is not a contrast enhanced image, it is a plain MRI. Again, this becomes a coronal section, and this is a T1 weighted image. So how do I know that? Because orbit is primarily appearing black in color. So at the optic nerve, I want you to look at the blue arrow which is pointing to the right optic nerve. That optic nerve is appearing whiter. This is because of the edema that is present, and the left optic nerve is normal. So this becomes classical of optic neuritis. Now look at flare, So if you can see, much of the lateral ventricle impulses have been occluded. The blue arrows are pointing to the whitish areas around the ventricle, so that becomes periventricular plaques, also known as Dawson's fingers colloquially. And this is very classical of multiple sclerosis. Okay, so what are the advantages of MRI? There is absolutely no radiation exposure and resolution is better than CT scan, but each MRI, an MRI brain takes at least 30 to 40 minutes, a minimum of 30 to 40 minutes. Hence, the patient needs to be cooperative and lying down for that duration without moving his head even once. Because if the patient who moves his head once, artifacts start coming up and the process needs to be repeated once again. Recent hemorrhages are not seen. It is very difficult. Hence, CT scan is the investigation of choice in head trauma, because hemorrhages can be caught up very easily in a CT scan. The cost of the instrument as well as the investigation is higher, and if there are any metallic foreign bodies or cardiac pacemakers present, then MRI is absolutely contraindicated. Just to summarize, what structures appear white and what structures appear black on a T1 and T2 signaling. I just want you to go through this. It's okay if you can't memorize it. Just understand that water is the most important thing that you need to catch to find out whether it is a T1 or a T2 weighted signal, as well as the gray and the white matters appearance. Okay, the next investigation is angiography, which is primarily study of the blood vessels. The first investigation is MR angiography, which is an angiography with the help of an MRI. This is an absolutely non-invasive method. No contrast is used because the flowing blood itself helps in visualizing. The flowing blood itself helps and acts like a contrast. The lesions that can be seen, the most important is carotid occlusion. Suppose a patient presents to you with transient loss of vision, usually unilaterally. Such a condition is called amaurosis fugax, and you should start thinking vascular causes for such conditions. The patient has a loss of vision for 5 or 10 minutes, eventually it recovers on its own. So carotid occlusion is one of the most common causes, carotid artery disease. However, the limitation of MR angiography is that aneurysms only more than or equal to 5 millimeters can be caught. Less than 5 millimeters, MR angiography is useless. The other lesions that you can see are stenosis, dissection, occlusion, or malformation. So depending on the clinical features of the patient, you can advise this investigation. MR venography has a similar concept. It is primarily used to study the dural venous sinuses and also the cavernous sinus thrombosis or stenosis. So this is how MR angiography looks like. The structure that we are trying to study here is the circle of Willis. The next investigation is CT angiography, which is angiography with the help of a CT scan. CT angiography can pick up aneurysms which are even less than 5 millimeters, which means it is obvious that it can pick up aneurysms more than 5 millimeters as well. That is what makes CT angiography the investigation of choice for intracranial aneurysms. It is only when CT angio cannot definitively say whether this is an aneurysm or not that you will use certain other investigations, but the investigation of choice is always and always CT angiography. 3D reconstruction is possible, and however contrast is always needed, which is the same for CT venography. Hence contrast side effects are again to be kept in mind. So this is how CT angiography can be done. Also note that the surrounding bony tissue is also been able to visualize. So you can visualize the soft tissues, which are the carotid arteries, the thyroid, along with the bony tissue. So a clinical correlation can be made very easily. The next investigation that I want to talk about is conventional catheter angiography. This has been there for a very long time. There is a catheter that is inserted via the femoral artery, sent right up to the carotid artery, and a dye is injected. This is the gold standard for aneurysm evaluation. However, since it is an invasive procedure and the side effect profile is much more as compared to CT angiography, it is not the first line of investigation. The first line is always CT angio. And so conventional catheter angiography is only done if CT angio is inconclusive. There is a concept of digital subtraction angiography, which means the images of the bone are removed and only the vascular tissue is left behind. Hence only the blood vessels are seen. Complications are again the reaction of the dye, Vasospasm, simply because you're irritating the blood vessels. Imagine starting from the femoral artery, going straight up and right into the carotid artery. Some amount of vascular irritation is possible, and embolus formation, because again, vascular trauma is very much possible in such a case. So this is digital subtraction angiography. Only the blood vessels are outlined. Bone is nowhere to be seen because it is digitally subtracted. Next investigation, very briefly, is ultrasonography. The frequency range is 5 to 20 megahertz. If I use a greater frequency, the penetration is less. That's why, if I have to image the retina, I will use a lesser frequency because I want that much more penetrance. So mass lesions and foreign body evaluation are very easily done on the basis of USG. It is a completely non-invasive procedure, and a very specific USG called B-scan can be used to differentiate between optic nerve head drusen and optic nerve sheath swelling in papilledema. The next investigation is PET or SPECT scan. Now these again are functional imaging. These do not image the structures, they image the function of those structures that we are studying. For PET scan, which is more commonly done, the isotopes that are 18 FDG, 13 ammonia or 18 fluoride. And the principle is that these isotopes get stuck inside the brain because the brain is going to use glucose for its metabolism. It is going to take in the glucose, it is going to remain intracellularly, and it doesn't go out. Special gamma cameras are used, and these gamma cameras pick up wherever these isotopes are present. So wherever there is brain activity, there is going to be this isotope of glucose, and wherever there is isotope of glucose, the gamma camera is going to pick up an image. So this is how a PET image appears. So the areas that are appearing in red, the redder the area, the more is the activity of the brain. Bluer the area, lesser is the activity of the brain. So red is most active. So where all can I use PET scan? It is basically a functional scan. I can use it for ischemic stroke, to evaluate the metabolism of the tumor, to look, to discuss the etiology of blepharospasm. Migraine is another indication, and perhaps the most important indication is cortical blindness. So say for example, I'm suspecting cortical blindness in the patient, which is blindness at the level of the occipital cortex. If I do not see functioning on a PET scan, then that means cortical blindness again becomes a diagnosis. The disadvantages are cost, availability, and poor resolution. This is one of the most expensive radiological investigations that can be done. And also the availability of the instrument is very limited. Very few hospitals have a PET scan, and even fewer hospitals will have a SPECT scan, which is single proton emission computerized tomography. So the isotopes that you use there are technetium-99 or iodine-123 iodoamphetamine. So that takes care of imaging in neuro-ophthalmology. Please let me know if you have any doubts and what topics you would like me to discuss next. As always, thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay indoors. Good day.